Welcome to The Christian Atheist, episode number 25. Thoughts on Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, part 2. Immanuel Kant's critique of pure reason was an attempt to carve out conceptual space for human freedom, and thus for the validity of ethics, in the face of the emerging scientific determinism of his age. Human reason, he tells us, faces fundamental limitations in its pretensions to knowledge. No matter, therefore, how thoroughly our rational stories, our scientific claims to knowledge about our world penetrates into its mysteries, the autonomy of the individual, human freedom, and ethical responsibility must remain postulates to which we can rationally assent. When we elevate Hegel's narrative logic to a metaphysics, that is, remove all real constraints from reason's purview and action, Hegel's philosophy renews the deterministic threat, though on a new front, against which Kant battled. Hegel's metaphysics is one of deterministic optimism, as it presents history as the progressive ascent of logic, reason, or spirit, from the conceptual opposition of being and nothingness to self-consciousness. This progressive ascent of reason to ever higher articulation and consciousness is the origin of Marx's faith in his own predictions for dialectical materialism. This same self-confidence pervades the post-Marxian leftists, even though they have abandoned the silly Marxian failures, the failed messianism of the second-order Hegelians. More on this in a future edition of The Christian Atheist. Marx wrote in his Theses on Feuerbach, "Philosophers have hitherto only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it." Hegel's philosophy was, as Marx indicates here, retrospective, descriptive, historical. And while his philosophy painted a picture in which human freedom, and thus ethics itself, was illusory, in which determinism ruled, Hegel stopped short of prescription. And although he certainly posited reason as a summum bonum, it was reason itself that was responsible for achieving itself, not Hegel. Reason was free. Hegel was merely an observer and servant. There is, then, a certain humility in Hegel's reach. While he occupied the divine position, he was a spectator, not the driver. From his God's eye view, Hegel sought to explain the progress of spirit to his time. Spirit itself was not predictable, Hegel said, but spontaneous, free. Apart from pre-existing structural indications, Hegel claimed that predicting spirit's development was impossible. And most certainly human action and conception, ethical or otherwise, was merely incidental to spirit's progress. Right, that is, justice, truth, ethics, and morality. Here we can read all human ethical consideration, is a product of whatever spirit produces. All that is rational is real, and all that is real is rational for Hegel. The Holocaust thus serves the advancement of spirit, as does Islamic terrorism, the Bolshevik Revolution. What we call evil is thus a justified, indeed good, which is the rewriting of necessary, moment in spirit's advancement. Nothing can be wrong in any absolute sense, but only in the provisional sense of being that which must be overcome for the advancement of reason. The only absolute good is reason itself, spirit, and thus whatever promotes it is justified. The end, spirit, justifies all means. Hegel's metaphysics is, thus, best understood as a theodicy, a solution to the problem of evil. How does it solve the problem? It makes evil unselbstständig, illusory, a mere moment that is necessary to the ongoing narrative of rationality's coming to self-consciousness. It explains evil, and I would add ethics, away, dissolving all ethical judgment into reason's progress. Evil is only an appearance. Rationality is the reality, and it always triumphs. Thus, for Hegel, the unselbstständig idea of a human ethics is essentially conservative. Conform yourself to reason, to the actuality of spirit that is the state. As all that is real is rational, the proper position of the individual is to side with the historical development of spirit. Thus, Hegel's conception of ethics was decidedly not a revolutionary ethic, an ethic of change. Marx was right. Hegel was describing the world, not seeking to change it. Hegel's actions, from God's seat, were those of the observer, the historian, relating what has been the case, and in no way what should be the case. Prescription is not the prerogative of the Hegelian philosopher. I would argue, of course, that the God's eye view is impossible even for the historian, that Hegel's unlimited sight is outside the capacity of any human observer, that Hegel's descriptive metaphysics is an arrogated position, an illusory, perhaps even better, imaginary perspective that no human observer can adopt, any more than the scientist can see the universe as a whole. To do such requires the ability to stand either outside the whole, the position of God, or at its very pinnacle, comprehending the whole that stands below, a position that is forbidden to any part, which is the unavoidable position of all human beings, even Hegel. Marx took Hegel's all-seeing eye, but claimed for himself God's temporal transcendence and his judicial robes as well. In the following quote, you should note that, for our purposes, what is here called the idea is equivalent to what we have called spirit or reason. Dialectic is Hegel's narrative logic. Marx says this: "My dialectic method is not only different from the Hegelian, but is its direct opposite. To Hegel, the life process of the human brain, that is, the process of thinking, which, under the name of the idea, he even transforms into an independent subject, is the demiurgos of the real world. And the real world is only the external phenomenal form of the idea. With me, that is Marx, on the contrary, the idea is nothing else than the material world reflected by the human mind and translated into forms of thought." The mystifying side of Hegelian dialectic I criticized nearly 30 years ago, at a time when it was still the fashion. The mystification which dialectic suffers in Hegel's hands by no means prevents him from being the first to present its general form of working in a comprehensive and conscious manner. With him, it is standing on its head. It must be, that is, Marx says it must be. It must be turned right side up again, if you would discover the rational kernel within the mystical shell. In its mystified form, dialectic became the fashion in Germany, because it seemed to transfigure and to glorify the existing state of things. In its rational form, it is a scandal and abomination. This comes from the afterword of the second German edition of Marx's Das Kapital, Volume 1. Hegel, says Marx, while reasoning properly, that's the dialectic, got it wrong both conceptually and morally. Marx did not object to taking God's position. He embraced that arrogation even more robustly than did Hegel. In other words, directly opposite my own stance, as expressed in the last edition of the Christian Atheist, Marx accepted Hegel's absolute, but rejected his idealism. Marx, adding to Hegel's all-seeing viewpoint, took upon himself the role of divine judge, as well as the pretension to omniscience necessary to that role. Like Hegel, Marx saw a deterministic metaphysical reality in which human reason, freedom, and ethics are merely the result of the dialectical conditions which give rise to them. Humans are cogs in the dialectical machine. Morality is a function of the material conditions of the group to which one belongs, bourgeois or proletarian. Human beings do not choose their values. They are dictated to them by the engine of dialectical materialism. The conflict between competing material conditions is likewise foreordained in both its point of conflict and in its resolution. All of this can be seen from outside the structure, from God's seat. And, Marx thinks, if we can see it, we might as well claim the rest of the divine attributes for ourselves too, right? It is this insight that explains nearly all the pernicious results of Hegel's philosophy that follow. Marx claimed both the determinism that explains away all ethics and moral responsibility at the human level, and claimed the righteous judicial robes of divine right, the freedom of God for himself, and thus the divine moral right to condemnation and legislation. I hope to lay out my final thoughts on the battle of the Titans, Kant and Hegel, in the next edition of the Christian Atheist. I hope that this edition was clear and of value to our ongoing conversation. If this is the first edition of the Christian Atheist that you've watched, please subscribe below to be sure not to miss upcoming episodes and to catch up on previous editions. First, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. And let us know what you'd like to hear from us by commenting. Wise Words for Your Occasion is located in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, but we're willing to travel. For inquiries or to book an occasion, go to wisewordsforyouroccasion.wordpress.com or see us on Facebook or check out our YouTube channel. You'll find links to all three in this post.